Imagine a people so fierce that they instilled fear into the Vikings of Scandinavia, and who defeated not only the raids of Vikings, but launched their own raids on Viking lands in Sweden. A century or so later, these same people battled and often defeated the Livonian Order, a knightly order allied with northern Germany's more famous Teutonic Knights. On at least 2 occasions, these mysterious people killed every German settler they could find on their land, and before that, they had defeated the Swedes and Danes who had come to settle and spread Christianity to these fiercely independent people. Long after the Scandinavian Vikings accepted Christianity, the Vikings of Estonia were still pagan. In many ways, Estonian and some Latvian tribes were Europe's last pagans. In an era dominated by the infamous raids and explorations of their Viking kin, the last Vikings, the Estonians of Estonia, developed a unique maritime culture, one that merged the ferocity of Viking tradition with the intricate dynamics of the Baltic trade routes. Their story, overlooked and underestimated, offers a different perspective on the Viking Age, one that challenges our understanding of what it meant to be a Viking and how their influence extended beyond the fjords of Norway and the shores of England to touch the coastlines of the Baltic Sea. Vikings, Northmen, Norsemen were the cries that went up throughout much of Europe during the early Middle Ages. Just the idea of the Scandinavian raiders sent shivers down the spine. For over 250 years, the Vikings traded with and terrified Europe. Historians mark the beginning of the Viking Age with the raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne on the northeast coast of England, and the end with the defeat of the last great Viking army in the west at Stamford Bridge in northern England, just days before the Norman invasion and the Battle of Hastings. But most people don't know that the Viking spirit lived on far longer than previously thought, at least in Estonia, on an island once known as Ösel to Swedish speakers, but known today as Saaremaa, its Estonian name. Saaremaa lies about 5 miles off the coast of Estonia. Today, the Baltic Sea is not much of an impediment to any would-be invaders, but in the Viking Age, 5 miles was a long way, and most invaders coming from the landward side could be seen almost as they left the shore. The rest of the island faces the Baltic Sea, not necessarily the world's calmest and easygoing body of water. On Saaremaa in 2008, workers digging a trench for electric cable found human remains, very old human remains. They notified the authorities, and archaeologists soon pored over the site. There was far more than just one body. When the site was excavated, 42 bodies were found, most of them men between 30 and 40 years old. Also on the site were 2 vessels, what historians believe to be the forerunners of the Viking ships known worldwide. The boats were similar to the ones carved into rock in Sweden about the same time. They're called the Salme ships because they were found near the town of Salme and were built sometime at the beginning of the 700s, decades before the Viking raid on Lindisfarne. Many of the men had clearly died in battle, and the grave goods placed inside the boats originated in Sweden. It's believed that the men in the Salme ships may have come to the island to establish trade or diplomatic ties, for the goods they had with them wouldn't typically have been carried on a short raid or voyage, which is all these boats were truly capable of. As of now, archaeologists and historians believe that the party landed and, when they went inland, were set upon by the native population. No one knows precisely what happened, and will probably never know. Perhaps the island's people buried the foreigners in the traditional Viking way, in their boats, surrounded by goods accompanying them to the afterlife. Who were the last people that these Swedish Vikings ever saw? Odds are, it was the Öselians, the name given to the islanders by the Germanic-speaking people around them. You probably have yet to hear of the Öselians, but anyone invading the island or the coast of Estonia nearby surely had. The Öselians were the target of the Livonian Order and other Christian groups in northeastern Europe from the 1200s to the middle of the next century. Livonia was the name of a feudal territory made up of most of Estonia and the northern part of Latvia. It's believed that the Öselians and other people living in Livonia worshipped the god Tarapita, or Tharapita, who had all the traits of the Scandinavian god Thor. We don't know a lot about the Öselians. They had no written language and were on the fringes of European civilization for a millennia. The early mention of them by that name comes from a 13th century priest, Henry of Livonia, but the Romans knew of them. In the 1st century AD, the Roman historian Tacitus mentions the Esti, believed to be the people who inhabited today's Estonia. The Romans knew of the area from tales from other people, and because Rome was the last stop for much of the trade leaving the Baltic region, the vast majority of that being amber, still prized for its beauty today. The famous Icelandic saga writer, Snorri Sturluson, wrote that in the 7th century, the legendary Swedish king Ingvar invaded Estonia. and was killed and buried there. In 967, the future king of Norway, Olaf Tryggvason, and his mother, fleeing troubles in their homeland, journeyed through Estonia to see powerful relatives among the Swedish Vikings, near Novgorod, Russia. At sea, Estonian Vikings captured their ship, killed most of the crew, and took Olaf as a slave. Sometime later, another Norwegian Viking visited Saaremaa and saw Olaf working in a marketplace and bought his freedom. In the 1100s, the Holy Roman Empire, which included most of what is now Germany, and the Danes, set out on what historians call the Livonian Crusade, the Christianization of the Baltics. In what is now Lithuania, they were largely successful, but in Latvia and Estonia, only separate chunks of land were converted. In 1187, pagan Estonian Vikings raided the vital trading center of Sigtuna in Sweden, taking with them much plunder and slaves. Estonian is part of the Finno-Ugric family of languages. This includes Finnish, Hungarian, and a number of smaller groups that lived in the area of modern St. Petersburg, Russia. One reason we know that comes from the experience of a German-speaking missionary in the 1200s who was killed by the Assyrians as he tried to convert them to Christianity. This monk, Frederick of Zell, was tortured in some horrible way, and while he was being tormented, the pagan Assyrians chanted Laula, Laula Papi, which means sing, sing priest, likely because of his screams. Laula is a Finnish language term. The first crusading army to try and settle and convert Saaremaa and the Assyrians was an army of Danes led by their king, Valdemar II, and a regional bishop from Denmark. No one knows exactly what happened, but suffice it to say that the Danes left not long after landing. They were back in Estonia in 1219 and established a fortress where the city of Tallinn is today. But Saaremaa was not directly affected. In 1220, an army of Swedes landed in Estonia, attempting to establish a presence there, but they were sent packing. In 1222, the Danes under Valdemar invaded Saaremaa again. They built a large stone fortress, but the Assyrians attacked, and within 5 days, the Danes surrendered and were allowed to return to the mainland, leaving hostages behind. The Assyrians tore down the fortress. The hostages likely returned home, for one of them was the brother of the powerful priest, and the man the Pope put in charge of the crusade, Albert of Riga. In 1227, Albert and the Livonian Knights invaded Saaremaa yet again, and this time they were successful. The Assyrians converted to Christianity. Some likely converted out of belief, but most others likely converted publicly and continued their pagan practices in private. We know this because in 1236, Assyrians and other tribes in Estonia and northern Latvia renounced Christianity and rebelled, winning the Battle of Sal in northern Lithuania. Feeling confident in their victory, the Italians on the island renounced Christianity and went on a killing spree, killing every Christian they could find. In 1241, the Islanders, the Livonian Order, which consisted mainly of German-speaking knights and the church-appointed German bishop of Saaremaa, signed a treaty in which the Islanders again accepted Christianity, but with some caveats, including the right to not take part in some religious practices they found oppressive. Nowhere else in Europe at the time were pagans given special terms for conversion, at least not on such a large scale. Clearly, the Islanders were a force to be reckoned with. For their part, more and more German-speaking people came to the island to settle and take advantage of the island's great trading location. The Assyrians seemed to change their mind a lot, because in 1261, the Assyrians, who likely had never given up many of their pagan ideas and practices, rebelled again. This time, their rebellion took a more terrifying and modern form. They searched out all of the Germans on the island and killed them. Most of the men were killed fighting, and those that weren't were executed by the Assyrians, who, according to reports at the time, preferred clubs to blades. The German women and children were burned alive, and some reports have them being burned alive in groups. The Assyrians used a fortress near the town of Karma, which was taken soon after by an army of Christian Latvians and mainland Christian Estonians. The island was placed under Livonian Order, and for 80 years or so, there was little bloodshed as far as we know. But in 1343, the Assyrians changed their minds again. Along with other pagans in Latvia and Estonia, they joined in the St. George's Night uprising against the order, drowning all the priests in the sea, and once again, killing every German they could find. The same thing happened throughout Latvia and Estonia. Priests and monks killed, women and girls assaulted and often killed, and churches set aflame. The St. George's Rebellion ended when the four most powerful pagan chiefs were lured to a meeting with the heads of the Livonian Order and others, including an army of knights. It was all a ruse. While the kings were dining and talking, the Livonian Knights and other Christians raided and killed large numbers of Estonians throughout the country. As you can likely figure out, the dinner of the four kings went south when the Christians demanded to know why so many innocent people were killed, including nearly 30 monks who lived at the very same castle where the dinner was happening. One of the Estonian kings made a serious error in judgment and replied that all Germans should be killed, even if they were only 2 feet tall. As you might imagine, that was all the Christian knights could take, and shortly thereafter, the kings were slaughtered as they headed to the rooms provided for them. The St. George's Day Massacre marked the last chapter of the Estonian pagans and the Oselians, though they didn't go without a fight. 10 days after the killing of the kings, the Estonians, including many Oselians, fought the Christians at the Battle of Sojame. Though they lost and an estimated 3,000 Estonians were killed, chronicles written shortly after describing wounded Estonians playing dead and leaping up, trying to kill as many Germans as they could before the end. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.